The VLOOKUP function introduced in 1985 is one of the most popular functions in Excel. Although the XLOOKUP function introduced in August 2019 is superior, but still millions of Excel users do not have Microsoft 365 or Office 2021, and the VLOOKUP function remains their best option for extracting values and records. I am Nabil Murad. This is a complete course about the VLOOKUP function, with over 30 different real-work examples from basic to advanced that will allow you to use it with total confidence and will also prepare you to switch to the newer XLOOKUP function when you get the chance, as I show you many alternate solutions with dynamic array functions along the way. You do not necessarily need to finish the entire course in one single sitting. You may come back and review any specific example by clicking on the timeline. Although you can watch the full course for free. However, if you want to practice, the valuable start and finish exercise files with helpful notes come for a little fee by clicking on the link below the video. Now let's start the course. Who doesn't like pizza? Let's assume I go to a pizza restaurant and I would like to order a medium pepperoni pizza. Then what do? I hold the menu and I start reading through the left column to see the different pizza available. When I bump into the pepperoni pizza, I move horizontally to the second column, then to the third column, and grab the price of the medium pepperoni pizza. What I did manually right now is typically what a VLOOKUP function is doing. So what is a VLOOKUP function? It's an extraction function. It extracts a value or a record and returns it. The V stands for vertical because we search vertically in the leftmost column of the menu. But in Excel, instead of calling it the menu, we call it the table array. Let me extract the price of a medium pepperoni pizza in Excel. I'm going to move this picture to the side, and I have the same exact menu within the Excel worksheet. I select cell I2, and I start creating my VLOOKUP function, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit Tab. I'm following the screen tip, which asks me for a lookup value. And the lookup value means, what are you looking for? I'm looking for a pepperoni pizza. Then I select cell H2. I type a comma, and the second argument is, where do you look for it? What's your table array? I said the table array is the menu. Then I click and drag to select all this menu in the blue frame, and then I type a comma, and then it asks me from which column you need a return value, because I'm looking for the medium size, then it's column 3, then I type 3, and then comma. The last argument, are you looking for an approximate match or an exact match? Whenever you search by text, it's an exact match. I hit the tab key to select exact. It appears as false. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I was able to extract the price of the medium pepperoni pizza. What if I change my selection? I have a drop list, and if I select, let's say, a Canadian pizza, then that's the price of the medium Canadian pizza. Now let's talk about the basics of the VLOOKUP function. I move to the next worksheet where I have a price list. In columns D, E, F, I see a product name, the price, and the color of the product. What if I would like to extract the price of product 3? I'll be creating a VLOOKUP function in cell B3. I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What are you looking for? What's your lookup value? I'm looking for product 3. I type a comma. Where do you look for it? What's your table array? I select the entire table, which is the price list, excluding the column headers. I can extend my selection after selecting the top row by hitting the shortcut Shift-Control down arrow, and then I type a comma. What's your column index number? From which column you need the return value? I'm looking for the price, which is column 2, and then I type a comma. Are you looking at an exact match? Yes, I select exact, and then I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I was able to extract the price for product 3. Let's assume I don't want the price, I want the color. I have a drop list in the column header, then I can switch to color, and now I need to modify my VLOOKUP function. I put it in the edit mode F2, and the only thing I need to change, I don't want a return value from column 2, I need a return value from column 3, then I change the 2 into 3. When I hit enter, I get the color. What if we want to make it dynamic, changing between 2 and 3, which is the column index number, but we want to do it dynamically? We learned about another function called the match function. The match function will look at the column header in cell B2, and it will return its position in the top row of the price list. Let's create a match function equal match, and then I hit tab. What do you want to match? I want to match the column header in cell B2. I type a comma. Where do you look for it? I look for it in the top row of my price list. I type a comma. I want an exact match, so I type 0, and I close the bracket for the match function. When I hit enter, I get 3 because color is at position number 3. If I change it and I say I want the price, then the match function is returning a 2. Now, what if I take this match function and I nest it inside the VLOOKUP function? Let's copy the function. I select the cell. I copy the function without the equal sign, Control C, and then I hit escape. I go to my VLOOKUP function. I put it in the edit mode F2, and then I put my cursor in the VLOOKUP function to show the screen tip. In the screen tip, I click on column index number to select the 3, and I paste my match function. When I hit enter, I get the price. If I change from the drop list from price to color, then I'm getting the color, and I created a dynamic function. If I change the product and I select product 6, I can get the color or the price depending on my selection in cell B2. In the previous examples, I showed you a VLOOKUP function where we selected an exact match. When do we select an approximate match? Let's see an example. I have an income tax table for this example, which shows me how much tax I should be paying depending upon my income. If my income is below 1,000, then I don't pay anything. If my income is anywhere between 1 and 3,000, I pay 25. Between 3 and 5, I pay 60. Between 5 and 10, I pay 135. Above 10,000, I pay 175. So what if my income is this amount, 3,256? If you look at this amount in the income tax table, you won't find it. It is somewhere between two brackets. And because we don't find the same exact amount in the left column of the income tax table, then it becomes an approximate match. Let's create our VLOOKUP function in cell O3, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I'm looking for my income. I click on cell N3, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? Where do you look for it? I look for it in this income tax table. I type a comma. And then what's your column index number? I just have 2 columns. I need a return value from column 2. And then I type a comma. Is it an exact match or an approximate match? I told you this amount is not available in the leftmost column. Then we are searching for an approximate match. But to show you what happens if I make a wrong selection for this argument, I'm going to intentionally make an error by selecting an exact match, which is not correct. When I close the bracket, I get the most popular error that we get with the VLOOKUP function. It's not available. We don't have that amount. What if I change it to an approximate match? I hit F2, and then I delete the last argument and I select true, which corresponds to approximate. I close the bracket and then hit enter, and I'm getting the corresponding tax amount. Now let's confuse these two options of exact and approximate match by looking at the next example. In this example, I have in column E some sales rep names, and I have in column F the corresponding sales amount for each one of the sales rep. My goal is to calculate how much commission each one of the sales rep will be getting. And because not every sales rep is getting the same commission rate, then I would like first in column G to extract the commission rate, which depends upon the name of the sales rep. And once I extract it, I just multiply it by the sales to get the commission amount. In column G, I'll be creating a VLOOKUP function, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit Tab. What's your lookup value? The commission rate depends upon the name of the sales rep. Then I select cell E3 and I type a comma. What's your table array? My table array will be the commission table, and I select the entire table excluding the column headers from A3 to B5. And because I have the intention of copying my VLOOKUP function down, then A3 to B5, the table array shouldn't change as I copy down. And to ensure that it doesn't change, I have to lock it by hitting F4. When I hit F4, dollar signs are added to change the relative reference to an absolute cell reference. I then type a comma, and here it says what's your column index number. I need a return value from the second column, then I type 2, comma, is it an exact match or an approximate match? I'm searching by name, then it's an exact match. Exact means false, and in computer language, false equals 0, true equals 1. So instead of false, I can type 0, and I close the bracket, and I hit enter. And I was able to extract the commission rate for the first sales rep. I can double click and send it down, and now I can calculate the commission. I select the entire column where I want to calculate the commission, and then I type an equal sign. I just want to multiply the sales in F3 multiplied by the rate that I extracted with the VLOOKUP function, and to populate the function in the entire range, I hit Control Enter. The employee's complaint saying it's not fair that we are doing the same job and we are getting different commission rates. And the company responded by changing the policy. And this is the new policy that the company introduced to satisfy the employees. They said everyone will be getting the same commission rate, regardless of who is the sales rep. But the more you sell, the higher will be the commission rate. If your sales are anywhere between 1,500 and 4,000, you get 5%. Between 4 and 6, you get 6.5, and above 6, you get 7.55. Now, with the new policy, the name of the sales rep doesn't matter. What really matters is the amount of sales. So I'm going to create a VLOOKUP function to extract the commission rate according to the new policy. I select cell G17 and I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit Tab. What's your lookup value? My lookup value now becomes the sales. I click on cell F17, the sales amount, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? I select the two columns of the commission rate table, and I lock it by hitting F4. I type a comma. I need a return value from column number 2, comma, and here is the important question. In the previous policy, I used an exact match, but now that the lookup value is the sales amount, I don't use an exact match. I use an approximate match. Approximate means true. In computer language, true equals 1. Then I type 1. I close the bracket and I hit enter. Now I double click to copy my function down, and I can calculate the commission rate. I type an equal sign. I multiply the sales by the result of the VLOOKUP function, and to populate the function, I hit Control Enter. That was the old policy, and the company paid according to the old policy. I'm going to add up all these numbers by clicking on Auto Sum, and I hit Enter. What about the new policy where I have the same exact sales rep and the same exact sales amount? Now, if I add up the commission paid by the company and I hit enter, not only the company satisfied the employees, but they saved money. This is a brilliant business decision. I use the VLOOKUP function for extracting one single value. However, in many situations, we want to extract an entire record. In this example, I have a list which shows a full name, an address, a city, a state, and email, and a balance. In cell I3, I created a drop list from which I can select any name. And I would like, when I select a name, I extract the full record corresponding to that name. And I'll be doing this by creating a VLOOKUP function, and I'll copy it across. When I copy it across, I will have a challenge, because for the address, I need to extract a value from the second column. For the city, I need a value from the third column. And for the state, I need from the fourth, fifth, and sixth column. Then, for the third argument of the VLOOKUP function, I want it to increment as I copy to the right. And I find it a good timing to introduce a new function to you that allows us to create incremental numbers as we copy to the right. It's the columns function. So I type equal columns with an S, and then I hit tab, and I select any two adjacent cells. When I close the bracket, how many columns do we have between K12 and L12? I have 2 columns. But if I copy this function to the right, it will keep returning 2, 2, 2, because all the column letters will change. However, if I select K12, the first reference, and I lock it by hitting F4, now K12 is not going to change. L12 only is going to change as I copy to the right, and that will return incremental numbers. Let's test. I hit enter. If I copy this function to the right, I get some incremental numbers. That's exactly what I need for the VLOOKUP function to work and extract an entire record. When you create a VLOOKUP function in one single cell, it doesn't matter whether you lock or you don't lock the lookup value and the table array. But if you intend to copy your function, then you definitely need to lock the lookup value and the table array. I'm going to create a VLOOKUP function equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? My lookup value is the name coming from the drop list in I3, and I lock it because I intend to copy to the right. I hit F4, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? I want to select the entire list, and I select the top row, Shift Control down arrow. If I hit F4, I lock the table array and I jump back to my function. I type a comma. What's your column index number? Here at this position, I want to increment as I copy to the right. Then I use my columns function, columns, and then I hit tab. Select any 2 cells you like. Close the bracket for the columns. Put your blinking cursor in the first reference and lock it with an F4, and then I type a comma after the columns function. Are you looking at an exact match or an approximate match? I type 0 for exact. I close the bracket and hit enter. I was able to extract the address corresponding to the selected name. If I copy to the right, then I get the different information and I extracted a full record. Let's test. By changing my selection, I select a different name, then all the information updates and everything is working fine. If your setup is laid in a different way and you want to copy the VLOOKUP function vertically, then instead of the columns function, I will be using a similar function called the rows function. So in cell J7, I'm going to create a similar VLOOKUP function, but I'll be copying it. So I want the column index number to increment as I copy down, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I select cell J6, and I lock it by hitting F4. I type a comma, and then I select the entire list. Select the first record, Shift Control down arrow, and then F4 to lock it and jump back. I type a comma. At this position, I want to return 2 for the column index number, but as I copy down, I need 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I use the rows function. I hit the tab key for the rows, and I select any 2 cells on top of each other. I close the bracket. I lock the first cell reference by hitting F4, and then I type a comma, then 0 for exact match, close the bracket and hit enter, and I was able to extract the address for the selected item. I can copy down, and I extracted a full record. If I change my selection from the drop list and I select a different item, then everything works fine and everything updates. The columns and the rows function work perfect with the VLOOKUP function. Now let's see a more advanced example. In this example, I have in column A list of countries, in column B I have a capital, and in cell E1 I have a drop list from which I can select a different country. And I want to create a VLOOKUP function that extracts the capital for that country. And I'm creating the VLOOKUP function equal VLOOKUP. It's a basic VLOOKUP function. My lookup value is the country coming from the drop list. I'm not locking because I'm not copying. I type a comma. What's your table array, which means where do you look for it? I want to select the entire list. I select the top record. I hit Shift Control down arrow. And then I want to jump back to the top. There is no need to lock. The shortcut is Control backspace. And then I type a comma. I need the capital, which is in column 2. I type 2 and then comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket and then I hit enter, and I was able to extract the capital for the selected country. Now the question is, what if I delete the list? So if I select these two cells and then Shift Control down arrow and then I hit delete, then automatically the VLOOKUP function fails. Then I'm going to undo Control Z. I put my function in the edit mode by hitting F2, and what if I select the table array? As I showed you, I click in the function and then click in the screen tip, select the table array, and I want to test what this table array will be returning. To test a subset of a function, I hit the F9 key. When I hit F9, then I see the entire table. A comma means a different column. A semicolon means a different row. That's the entire table. Usually what we do when we test, we hit Control Z because we don't want to hardcode the values in our function. But let's assume I hit F9 and then I hit enter. I would have hardcoded the entire list inside my VLOOKUP function. That works fine when you have a small table array. And if I go and delete my list, Shift Control down arrow, and then I hit delete, my function works just fine. And if I change my selection from the drop list, I select Canada, the capital of Canada is Ottawa, and my VLOOKUP function is working just fine without having a table array. A nice trick that works with this concept is to apply protection and hide the formulas. I'm not covering that in this tutorial. In my next example, I want to look up a subset of a string of text. Then I have 3 products, and I want to extract the price of each one of these products. But for the table array, I don't have the full name of the product. I just have a little part, either from the left, from the middle, or from the right. So the first thing I want to do is to extract my lookup value, which is a subset of a string of text. In the first example, I want to extract the left side preceding the dash in each one of these IDs. Then I'll be using a left function with a find function. Equal left, and then I hit tab. Left of what? I want left of this cell A3, and then I type a comma. How many characters would you like to return? I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but I want to make it dynamic. Then I'm going to use a find function to find the position of the dash and subtract 1. I type find, and then I hit tab. What do you want to find? I type a dash in double quotation, double quote, dash double quote, and then I type a comma. Where do you look for this dash? I look for it in this cell A3. I close the bracket, and then I close the bracket for the left function. When I hit enter, look at this, it's extracting more than what I need. I don't want the dash itself. Then I put my function in the edit mode F2, and before the last closing bracket, I type -1. When I hit enter, I was able to extract the subset of the text that I'll be using as a lookup value. Let's put my function in the edit mode F2. I'm going to cut all this part to make it easy for you to understand. Control X, and I start creating my VLOOKUP function. Equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? This is the entire left undefined function. Control V. I type a comma, and then I select the entire table array, and I lock it F4. I type a comma. The column index number is 2, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket and hit enter. I was able to extract the price for the first ID. Then I copy my function down. What if I want to extract by using the 3 digits in the middle of the product ID? Then I'll be using a mid function to do that. So I type equal mid, and then I hit tab. Mid of what? Mid of cell A10, and then I type a comma. I want to start after the dash. Then to specify the starting number required by the mid function, I use a find function. Double quote dash double quote, and then I type a comma. Where do you look for this dash? I select cell A10 one more time, and I close the bracket. That will be the starting number. No, that's not the starting number, because the find function will return the position of the dash, where I want to start extracting from the 6. Then I add 1 plus 1. I type a comma. How many characters would you like to extract? I type 3, because all the codes consist of 3 digits, and I close the bracket for the mid function. When I hit enter, I get the 648. I want to draw your attention that the 648 is left aligned. That means it is perceived as text, because the mid function and the find function are text functions. Then the result is left aligned like a text, while in my table array, I have the numbers right aligned because they are perceived as numbers. If I use this number in a VLOOKUP function, it will return an error. Let's try. I put my function in the edit mode F2. I cut all this part, Control X, and I type VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? All the mid function with the find function that I created, I paste it at this position. And then what's your table array? I select the table array by dragging. I lock it F4. I type comma 2 for the column index number, comma 0 for an exact match. I hit enter, and it says we don't have that number. The VLOOKUP function is unable to match text with a number. So I want to use a little trick to convert the result of the mid function into a number. So I put my function in the edit mode F2, and I click right after the mid function, and I say plus 0. By performing this simple calculation that won't change the number, it will change the result of the mid function from text to a number. And when I hit enter, I get the right result, and I can copy it down. Finally, I can search by partial text from the right side of a string of text. What if I want to use the 4 characters from the right side? Then I'll be using a write function to do that. So I type equal write, and then I hit tab. I want the write from cell A17, 4 characters, then I type comma 4, and I close the bracket for the write function. When I hit enter, that will be my lookup value. Let's go ahead and put it in a VLOOKUP function. F2 to put my function in the edit mode. I type VLOOKUP before the write, and then I hit tab. I click at the end, I type a comma. What's your table array? I select the table array, and don't forget to lock it by hitting F4, comma 2, comma 0. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I was able to extract the price, and I copy my function down. In the last example of this tutorial, a common work situation where we need to extract the value at the intersection of 2 conditions. I have a list which shows some month from January to August, and then I have 5 brands of laptop, and I have the quantity sold in each month for each brand. I created 2 drop lists in cell J3 to select the month, and in cell J4 to select the product. Now I would like to create a VLOOKUP function that extracts the price corresponding to the selected month and the selected product. In preparation for doing this, I want to know the product I selected from the drop list is available in which column of the entire list. Then I'll be creating a match function to do that, equal match, and then I hit tab. I want to match this product available in cell J4, comma, in the top row of the table array, and I select the top row starting from the blank cell. I type comma 0 for exact, and then I hit enter. It says this is column number 3. That will be the column index number of my VLOOKUP function. Let me copy it and keep it in memory. I copy it from the formula bar without the equal sign, Control C, I hit escape, and now I'm ready to create my VLOOKUP function. Equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? My lookup value will be the month coming from the first drop list, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? I select from B4 down to G11, and then I type a comma. What's your column index number? Well, my column index number is changing, and to return a different column index number, I paste my match function. Comma 0 for exact match, and I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I was able to extract the quantity. Conditional formatting highlights the quantity in the source data. If I change the selected month and I select a different month, that will be the result. If I select a different brand of laptop, let's say I select HP, then I get the right result. There are many different ways of getting the same result. I can use an index and two match functions. I can use the intersector operator of Excel. I can use an XLOOKUP function with a nested XLOOKUP function. But in this tutorial, I was focusing on the VLOOKUP function. One of the biggest limitations of a VLOOKUP function is to search to the left side of the lookup column. In this example, I have a country, a capital, and a code. In cell F2, I have a drop list from which I can select the code, and I want to create in F3 a VLOOKUP function that extracts the country name. So if I start typing equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab, my lookup value is in F2, the cell above. I type a comma. I select the table array. Note that the code is in the right column and the country is in the left column. Then I'm extracting from the left side of the lookup column. I hit Shift Control down arrow. I hit Control backspace to jump back to the top. What's your column index number? I want to return value from column 1. And then I type comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket. I hit enter. I get not available. Well, to fix this issue, I'm going to use a choose function to build the table array in memory. So let's create the choose function first, equal choose. My goal is to have the lookup column to the left side, at least in memory. I hit the tab key, and then I type in curly brackets 1, 2. I close the curly bracket, and then I type comma. What's the first column? I select the code, Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace. I then type another comma. I select the country, Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace, and I close the bracket for the choose function. If I want to test the result of this function, I would have built the table array in memory. If I hit F9, or by the way, look at this tooltip. This is totally new, the formula value tooltip. I can see it here. I'm using the latest version of Microsoft Excel, but I'm going to use F9, and this is what I'm getting. I'm reversing the lookup table. Let's hit Control Z, and then I cut it, Control X, and start building my VLOOKUP function. VLOOKUP, I hit the tab key. What's your lookup value? The cell above, I type a comma. What's your table array? All the choose function that I just created, Control V to paste, then comma 2, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket, and I was able to extract the country. If I test by selecting a different code, So let's say I select this code, I get the corresponding country, I select another one, I get the corresponding country, and so on. This example is one of the situations I would use the XLOOKUP dynamic array function if you have Microsoft 365. So in cell L2, I'll be typing equal XLOOKUP. I hit the tab key. What's your lookup value, the cell above? And now I'll be providing the lookup column separate from the return array. So I select the lookup array, which is the code, shift control down, arrow control backspace, and then comma. The return array will be the country, shift control down, arrow control backspace, I close the bracket, and of course the XLOOKUP function is working just fine. If you don't have Microsoft 365, you can still use another function other than the VLOOKUP function, and I'll be using as an example the index and match function. Equal index, and there I hit tab. I need a return value from the country, shift control down, arrow control backspace, comma, and for the row number, the second argument of the index function, from which row you need a return value, I use a match function. Then I type match, I hit the tab key, I want to match the code coming from cell O2, comma, in the entire column of codes, shift control down, arrow control backspace, and comma 0 for exact. I close the bracket for the match function, and then I close the bracket for the index function. The match function is providing the row number. Should you wish to see the result, when I click on row to select this part, this is row number 12, as you can see in the formula value tooltip. Now if I hit enter, I get the correct result, and we were able to extract from the left side of the lookup column either by using a VLOOKUP with a choose, or using an XLOOKUP, or using an index with a match function. In this example, I have a list which shows a name, a state, a phone, a date, a cost, quantity, and total. And then I have in cell J2 a drop list from which I can select the name. In cell K2 I have a drop list from which I can select the state. And I would like to extract the phone number. And because I have two lookup values, I'm looking for Carmen in California. I do have Carmen in other states, and I do have other names in the state of California, but I just want the combination of the name and the state. There are two ways of solving this issue. I can create a helper column in column A, in which I join the name and the state. And I can do that by typing an equal sign. I click on cell B2, the name. I use the joining operator Shift 7. I click on the state in cell C2, and there I hit enter. Now I can double click and send it down, and I would have created a helper column that combines the two lookup values. Let's expand it. And now I can create in cell L2 my VLOOKUP function using the two terms, the name and the state, equal VLOOKUP. What's your lookup value? My lookup value is the combination of the name and Shift 7 and the state. I then type a comma. Where do you look for it? I select the table array starting from the helper column, shift control down arrow, and then control backspace to jump back to the top because I'm not copying. I don't want to lock. I type comma, and I want the phone number. This is column number 4. Then I type 4, and then I type comma 0 for exact match. I hit enter, and now I get the result. That's the phone number. What if I select a combination that doesn't exist? So let's say if I change the state and I select Colorado, we don't have Carmen in Colorado, then I get a not available error. In this situation, to avoid the error message, I put my function in the edit mode F2, and I wrap the VLOOKUP function in an if error function. If error, and then I hit tab. What do you want to return if the VLOOKUP function returns an error? I type a comma and then double quote, I close the bracket, and then I hit enter, then I get a blank. Instead, if you want a message, put it in the edit mode, and between the double quotation, you can type invalid selection. And when I hit enter, I get invalid selection. This solution requires a helper column. But I have another solution that doesn't require a helper column. So if I delete the helper column, Shift Control down arrow, and then I hit delete, I delete my function, and I recreate my function by using a choose function. As I said, the choose function will be building the table array in memory. So if I type equal choose, and then I hit tab, I type in curly bracket 1, 2, and then comma, what's value 1 for the choose function? The combination of the name and state. So I select the entire range from B2, Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace, from B2 to B26. And then I want to join it to the state from C2, Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace. And that would be the first value provided to the choose function corresponding to 1. And then I type a comma. The second value will be the phone number. Then I select D2, Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace, and then I close the bracket for the choose function. I want to test the result of the choose function. Then I select it, and then I hit F9, and now I would have built an entire table in memory where the combination of the name and the state is the left column, while the phone number is the right column. I hit Control Z. I cut the function Control X, I have it in memory, and then I start building my VLOOKUP function. VLOOKUP, I hit tab. What's your lookup value? My lookup value is the combination of the name from J2 and the state from K2, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? All the choose function that I created, and then I type a comma. I want from the second column, then I type comma 2, comma 0 for exact match, and then I hit enter. The combination of Carmen and Colorado is not a valid combination, so if I try another option, California, I get the right result, but to avoid the not available error, I will wrap the bunch of functions in an if error function. I hit F2, and then before the VLOOKUP function, I type if error. I click at the end, I type a comma, and in double quotation, I type invalid selection. I close the double quotation, I close the bracket for the if error function, I hit enter, and now I have my function working for any option, for any combination of name and state. In this example, I have a list of names, the address, the city, the state, and the balance. And I would like to extract the balance based upon a specific name. It looks like a very simple VLOOKUP function. So let's create this VLOOKUP function equal VLOOKUP. My lookup value is one cell to my left, comma. My table array is the entire list here above. I lock it because I have the intention to copy down. And then I type a comma. I need a return value from column 5. Comma 0 for exact match. When I close the bracket and hit enter, it says, well, this name is not available. How come? Kyla Henriquez is the second name in this list. I can see it. But look what happens when I select the name and I click in the formula bar. There is a trailing space. And because of this trailing space, the VLOOKUP function doesn't consider it as an exact match. So what can I do? The extra space is in the lookup value. Then I'm going to wrap the lookup value in a trim function. I put my function in the edit mode, and then I click before B21 the lookup value, and I wrap it in a trim function. I close the bracket after B21, and when I hit enter, I get the right result. This is the balance, and I can copy my function all the way down. The opposite of this situation, instead of having the invisible extra space in the lookup value, I might have the invisible extra space in the lookup column of the table array. Let me show you this situation. When I scroll down, I have the same exact list. Then I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. My lookup value is one cell to my left, comma. I select the entire table array, and I lock it F4 I type comma 5, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, it says it's not available. This time, if I select Kyla and click in the formula bar, there is no extra space, because in this example, the problem is in the lookup column. If I select the same name and I click in the formula bar, then there is an extra space in the lookup column, the leftmost column of the table array. How can I solve this problem? I put my function in the edit mode, F2, and this time I'll be wrapping the table array in a trim function. So if I type trim and then I hit tab, I close the bracket after the trim function after the table array. When I hit enter, I get the result, but I lost the formatting. So the number doesn't look nicely formatted. Moreover, it is left aligned. Left aligned simply means it is perceived as text. So how can I solve this situation? The result of the trim function is text. So in this case, I'm going to give a stimulus to Excel to tell the VLOOKUP function that the result is not text, it's a number. How do I do this? I hit F2 and then I perform any calculation. I can multiply by 1. I can add 0. That doesn't change the result, but it tells Excel that this is a number. Now I can double click and send it down. I'm using Microsoft 365, so I didn't need to hit Ctrl-Shift-Enter. In an older version, you might need to hit Ctrl-Shift-Enter. In this example, I have a list that shows a title, and I would like to extract the cost for this title. Where am I going to extract it from? From another sheet. If I click on the next sheet, cost, then I can see two tables. In the first table, I have some of the titles along with the cost, and in the second table, I have the remaining titles and the cost. If a title doesn't exist in the first one, then it will be in the second one, and vice versa. I name the two tables. If I click on the Table Design tab, I name the first one Price A, and I name the second one Price B, so I can create my function without having to move back and forth between the two sheets. I'll be creating multiple solutions, and I want to share with you like kind of comparison between the classic VLOOKUP function and the new XLOOKUP function. And then I'll be using a combination of both to get the easiest function. I start with the VLOOKUP function. I say equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. I'm looking for this title, and then I type a comma. What's your table array? I name the table Price A, then I type Price A. I select it, comma, I need a return value from column 2, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket and then I hit enter. It says, well, this title is not available in Price A table. Then it should be in Price B table. So I'm going to wrap my VLOOKUP function in an IFERROR function. I put it in the edit mode F2, and then I wrap it in an IFERROR function, IFERROR, and then I click at the end. If you don't find it in Price A table, then use another VLOOKUP function to get it from Price B table. And I type VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? Same title in cell A2. I type a comma. This time I'll be looking in the second table, which is Price B. I hit the tab key, then comma 2 for the column index number, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket for the VLOOKUP function. I close the bracket for the IFERROR function, and I get the right result. I can copy this function all the way down. But I want to create another solution using a dynamic array function, the XLOOKUP function. Then I hit delete, and then I'll be typing equal XLOOKUP. I just want you to be aware of the XLOOKUP function, even if you don't have it yet, because it's available in Office 2021 and it's available in Microsoft 365. So if you are using an older version, the VLOOKUP function is fine. But at least I'm preparing you to switch to the newer function whenever you get the chance. Equal XLOOKUP. The XLOOKUP function is asking for the lookup value, which is the title. And then I type a comma. Where do you look for this title? I want to combine the title column from price A table with the title column in price B table. I want to append them. Then I'll be using a VSTACK function, vertical stack function. Then I type VSTACK. I hit the tab key and I type price A. From price A table, which column do you want? I type an opening square bracket and I want the title. I close the square bracket and then I type a comma. I want the same column from price B table, then I type price B. I select it. I then open the square bracket, select the title, close the square bracket, and then close the bracket for the VSTACK function. If you want to see what I'm doing, I can select the lookup array, and then I hit F9, and I would have created a long column combining the title from price A table and price B table. Let's undo, and then I type a comma. What's your return array? My return array will be the same exact thing. I'll be combining, I'll be stacking the cost column from the two tables. Then I use a second VSTACK function, and then I type price A. From price A, I want the cost. I close the bracket for price A and cost, and then I type a comma. Now I want price B to append it below price A. And I also want the cost. I hit the tab key. I close the square bracket. I close the bracket for the VSTACK function. And now I close the bracket for the XLOOKUP function. When I hit enter, I get the result, and I can send the result down by selecting this option, and I get the result, and I would have extracted the cost from the two tables. Is it the best option? To my humble opinion, I find the XLOOKUP function with two VSTACK functions really complicated. So I'm going to use a different option. Let me delete, Shift Control down arrow, delete, Control backspace. And now I'm going to combine the VLOOKUP with a dynamic array function. So if I type equal VLOOKUP, what's your lookup value? I select the title, comma, what's your table array? My table array is to combine the entire tables together, is to stack the two tables. Then I type VSTACK. What do you want to stack? I select price A, and then comma, price B, and then I close the bracket for the VSTACK function. That was the table array part, and then I type a comma 2, comma 0, close the bracket and hit enter. I get the result, and I can send it down, and that's my preferred solution in case we have dynamic array functions. In Excel, a common work situation is to compare lists, compare tables, compare numbers. In this example, I have a list of invoices issued by the sales department for one of the clients. And then I have a list of invoices for the same client from the accounting department showing the invoices that have been paid. Some of the invoices are not yet paid, and I would like to know these invoices. Then I'm going to create a VLOOKUP function in cell E6, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. I want to look at this invoice, and then I type a comma. I want to look at it in one single column. Look at this strange table array, Shift Control down arrow, and then F4 to lock it and jump back. I type a comma, and this time, because I have a table array of one column, the column index number is 1, comma 0 for exact match. I close the bracket and then I hit enter. If the invoice is available, it returns the number of the invoice. What if the invoice is not available? When I copy down, some of the invoices are not paid. I can keep the error message and I will know automatically the number of the invoice that is not paid, or I can wrap my VLOOKUP function in an IFERROR function, F2, and I click before the VLOOKUP function, I type IFERROR, and then I click at the end, and in double quotation I type not paid, and I close the bracket for the IFERROR function. I hit Ctrl Enter to populate the function. A better option, if you have dynamic array functions, is to use the xmatch function. Very simple. So if I type equal xmatch, and then I hit tab, what do you want to match? I want to match this entire column. Shift Control down, arrow Control backspace, no need to lock anything. And then I type comma. I want to match it to the other column of invoice numbers. I select the first value, Shift Control down, arrow Control backspace. I close the bracket, and when I hit Enter, it returns the same result, and the function spills to the entire column without having to lock, without having to copy. In this example, I have a list which shows a buyer, a city, a state, a date, an item, the size of the item. I want to extract the price, and I have some other columns for the quantity, the discount, and the total. But the price depends upon two factors: the brand of the computer, whether it's Acer, Dell, or Lenovo, and the size. So if I want to use a VLOOKUP function, I have to look which table to pick up. I have a price list for Lenovo, where I see the size and the price. I have another price list for Dell, and I have a third price list for Acer. Then the price depends upon two factors. Number one, which table array to select, and number two, the size. I have different solutions for this situation. In solution number one, I named the three table arrays. I named this one Lenovo, and then I named the second one Dell, and I named the third one Acer. To name a range, we just select that range and type the name in the name box. That's one of many techniques for naming. So I want to create a VLOOKUP function that will look at the price, and it will indirectly pick up the corresponding table array that we named following the brand name. How do I do that? I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I'm looking by size. Then I select cell J4. I type a comma. Now the table array could be one of three, and because I named them, I'm going to use an indirect function, indirect, and then I look at the item. I don't mean the item, I indirectly mean the named range of the item, whether Acer, Dell, or Lenovo. I close the bracket for the indirect function, comma 2, comma 0 for exact match, and now when I hit enter, I get the price. I can double click and send it down. I'm going to hide these columns because I'm going to use a different solution. Right click and hide. And now I want to create a different solution in which I'll be nesting two VLOOKUP functions. I created a helper table. In this helper table, I type three items, Lenovo, Dell, and Acer. If I want to look at the Lenovo table, that's table 1. If I want to look at Dell table, that will be 2. If I want to look at Acer table, that will be 3. So I'll be creating a choose function to build the table array. Equal choose, and then I hit tab. And the first argument of the choose function is a number, and that number will be returned by a VLOOKUP function. So if I type VLOOKUP, I want to look at this item in cell T4. I type a comma. What's your table array? My table array will be the helper table that I created, and I named it items. I then type a comma. I need a return value from the second column 2. and then I'm looking at an exact match, then I type comma 0 and I close the bracket. All the VLOOKUP function is the first argument of the choose function. Then I need to provide the three values 1, 2, 3. I type a comma. The first value is Lenovo, and then I type a comma. The second value is Dell. I hit tab, and then I type a comma. The last value is Acer. I hit tab, and I close the bracket for the choose function. Now, which table should I get? When I'm looking for Acer, then I need table 3. What if I select this entire function to check? When I select this entire function, I can see the entire table corresponding to Acer. That's fine. Let's cut it, Control X, and now let's create the outer VLOOKUP function. I type VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. My lookup value will be the size. We are searching by size. I type a comma. What's your table array? It will be this bunch of functions, the choose and the second VLOOKUP function. I paste it at this position. Then I type comma 2, comma 0. I close the bracket, and then I hit enter, and I get the result. I double click and send it down. In this example, I have a list which shows a name, a city, a state, and an amount. We have multiple sales transactions in each state, and I want to be able to select a state in cell G3 and accordingly extract all the amounts for the transactions in that state. One of the limitations of the VLOOKUP function is that it returns only the first value. So with the state of Illinois selected, I can see that I have two transactions highlighted by conditional formatting. If I create a VLOOKUP function, it will just extract the first result. And the same limitation applies to the XLOOKUP function. So let's see what we can do. If I type equal VLOOKUP and then I hit tab, and then I select the state coming from cell G3, I will lock it F4 because I'll be copying down. And then I hit comma. I select only two columns for the table array, the state and the amount. Shift Control down arrow, and then I hit F4 to lock it and jump back. I type comma 2, comma 0 for exact match. When I hit enter, I get the first amount. And if I copy down, then I'm getting the same exact amount. The VLOOKUP function always returns the first value. What about the XLOOKUP function? Equal XLOOKUP. And then I hit tab. I select the state from cell G3. I hit F4 to lock it, and I type a comma. I select the lookup column, which will be the state. Shift Control down arrow F4 to lock it, and then I type a comma. And then I select the return array, which will be the amount. Shift Control down arrow, and then I hit F4. Usually with dynamic array functions, we do not need to lock if the function will spell automatically, but this function will not spell. I hit enter, it returns the first amount, and if I click and drag, it keeps returning the same amount. I want to delete these two functions and see another option. What if I want to select the last amount? I can combine the VLOOKUP function with a sort function, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. The lookup value is this one. And we know that the VLOOKUP function will return one single value. I type a comma, and then I want to wrap the table array in a sort function. Then I type sort, and then I hit the tab key. Here is the table array, these two columns. Shift Control down arrow, and then F4 to lock it and jump back. I type a comma. For the sort index, I want to sort based upon the amount. Then I type 2. And then for the sort order, I want to sort descending to bring the bigger amount. I hit tab, which is -1, and then I close the bracket. On the sort function, this is the table array. I type comma 2 for the column index number, comma 0 for the range lookup, and then I close the bracket for the VLOOKUP function. When I hit enter, it's returning the last amount. What about the XLOOKUP function? It has an extra argument to start searching in reverse order equal XLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. The lookup value will be the state. I type a comma. The lookup array will be the entire column for the state. Shift Control down arrow and then Control backspace, comma. The return array will be the amount. Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace. I then type a comma. If not found, I'm going to skip it. And for this argument, I'll accept the default exact match and I skip it. And for the next argument, which is the search mode, I want to select the second option, search from last to first. I hit the tab key, I close the bracket, and the XLOOKUP function is still returning one single value, but it's the last one. Then how in the world can I extract all the amounts corresponding to the selected state Illinois? I need to create a helper column that increments every time I see the name of the state in cell G3. And to do that, I'm going to create a helper column starting from cell A3. I would like to create a sum function, then I type equal sum, and then I hit tab. What would you like to sum? If the state in the same row is equal to the state from the drop list in cell G3 and I lock it, that's the first thing I want to sum, and then I type a comma and I select the cell above. I know that the cell above is text. When you use a text value in a sum function, it excludes it, and if the state in the same row is equal to the state from the drop list, then we get a true, which is equal to 1. If not, we get a 0. And as we copy down, whenever there is another true, which means another 1, then the value will increment. Let's see the result. I hit enter. Now the condition is not met. If I double click and send it down, you will see that I get 1 because the condition is met, and plus 0 from the cell above that returns 1. All other cells returns a false, which is 0, plus 1 from the cell above, we get 1. When the condition is met, then we get another true, plus the 1 from the cell above, and it keeps incrementing every time the condition is met. With this helper column, I can create my VLOOKUP function to extract multiple values. I delete what I have in H3 and I start creating my VLOOKUP function. Then I type equal VLOOKUP and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I want 1 and then 2 and then 3 and so on. And to be able to increment the lookup value as I copy down, I'll be using a rows function to do that. Then I type rows and then I hit tab. I select the same cell twice by hitting shift : any cell, and I close the bracket. Now I want to lock the first reference by hitting F4. What does it mean? From rows F1 to F1, that's one single row. Then I'll be extracting the 1. But when I copy down from rows F1 to F2, that will become 2. Then I'll be extracting the first occurrence of 2 and so on. That's my lookup value. I click at the end, I type a comma, and now where is your lookup array? I select from column A to column E, shift control down arrow, F4 to lock it and jump back, and then I need to extract a return value from column number 5, then I type 5, 0 for exact match for the range lookup, and I close the bracket, and then I hit enter. This is the first result. This is the first occurrence of Illinois. If I click and drag, then I get the second occurrence, and then I don't have any other occurrences, then I get a not available error. To fix the error, I'm going to wrap my function in an IFERROR function. I hit F2, and before the VLOOKUP function, I type IFERROR. We use the IFERROR many times with the VLOOKUP function. I click at the end, I type a comma, and if the VLOOKUP function is returning an error, then I want nothing, double quote, and I close the bracket. To populate the function, I hit Control Enter, and I was able to extract multiple results in one column. Let's change. What if I select Louisiana? Then we have one single transaction. What if I select Florida? I have many transactions. I'm not quite sure if this is the last one because I didn't drag down far enough. So 4,500, then this is correct. We got the last one. I have another example where we want to extract multiple rows. So if I navigate to the right, I do have a list of names and we have the sales for multiple months. I want to be able to select a client name and extract all the transaction for that client. When I use a VLOOKUP function, it will be returning a value from column 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Then I'll be providing a very special format for the column index number. Let's see how we do that. I type an equal sign and then I type VLOOKUP. I want to extract all the amounts corresponding to Emily. Then Emily is my lookup value. I type a comma. What's your lookup array? My lookup array will be this entire list. I select the entire list with all the columns. I then type a comma. What's your column index number? Usually I can provide 2 for January, 3 for February, 4 for March, and so on. But because I want multiple return values, I type a curly bracket, and in curly brackets, I'll be typing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I close the curly bracket, and that was the column index number. I type a comma, and then I type 0, which means false, for the range lookup, which means exact. I close the bracket for the VLOOKUP function, and then I hit enter. What happens is, because this is Microsoft 365, then the function is not able to spill to the adjacent cells. But what I want to show you, if I put this function in the edit mode, and I select the VLOOKUP function, the entire VLOOKUP function, then actually it was able to extract all the values, an entire row for the corresponding lookup value Emily. But the VLOOKUP function is unable to display it in one cell. Then to solve this problem, I'm going to sum all the values. So if I wrap it in a sum function, then I close the bracket at the end, I would have extracted multiple values, and then I'm adding them up. When I hit enter, I get the result. Can I do that with an XLOOKUP function? Definitely I can do it. So if I type equal XLOOKUP, I then hit tab. I select my lookup value. I then type a comma. My lookup array will be this entire column of names, and then I type a comma. My return array will be all the numbers from January to June, and then I close the bracket. Where I hit enter, I would be extracting all the numbers. I have a formula text here, so if I delete it, now look at this, it is spilling to the adjacent cells. I'm going to undo, and to avoid getting the spill error, I'm going to wrap the XLOOKUP function in a sum function. So when I hit sum, all the numbers will be added up, and I get the same result like the VLOOKUP function. This example is a very common work situation. I have a list which shows a date, a region, a manager, customer, cost of goods sold, and sales. And I would like to select two conditions, a condition for the region and a condition for the manager. And if the two conditions are met, I would like to extract the entire record. We have multiple records meeting the two conditions. I'll be using a VLOOKUP function with a helper column. And then I'll be using a dynamic array function. This is one of the work situations where the dynamic array function will be a lot easier. In order to use a VLOOKUP function, I want to create a column that increments every time the two conditions are met. Then I'm going to create a sum function like the one I created in a previous example. So I'll be typing equal sum, and then I hit tab. What would you like to sum? I want to sum the two conditions, if met, plus the cell above. Then I use an AND function. The AND function will be evaluating the two conditions. Condition 1 is in the region. I select the region in the same row, and I ask, is it equal to the region coming from the drop list? And I lock it, F4. I type a comma, I'm still in the AND function. My second logical test will be evaluating the manager name and ask if it is equal to the manager selected from the drop list, and I lock it, F4. These are my two conditions. The AND function will return a true only if the two conditions are met, and a true equals 1. I close the bracket for the AND function, and I would like to add, beside the true or false, true equals 1, false equals 0, I type comma, and I select the cell above, which is text. The sum function excludes text. When I close the bracket and hit enter, then I'm getting a 0. What if I double click and send it down? I get a bunch of zeros, but whenever the two conditions are met, I will get a 1, and that will increment when there is a second occurrence where the two conditions are met, and so on. Conditional formatting highlights the records where the two conditions are met. I can select Amanda instead of Nabil to see the conditional formatting here. So if I click on the drop list and select Amanda, then I can see the first occurrence and the second occurrence. How in the world can I extract the records where the two conditions are met? I'll be creating a VLOOKUP function, equal VLOOKUP. This VLOOKUP function requires multiple helper functions. First, I want to extract the first occurrence, then the second occurrence, then the third one. Then I use for the lookup value another function that increments as I copy down. It will start by 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. What is this function? It's the rows function. I type rows and then I hit tab. I select the same cell, any cell you like, let it be L1, and then I hit Shift : to select the same cell one more time, and then I lock the first L1. When I lock it, then I'm creating an expandable range that will increment as I copy up and down. This is exactly what I want for the lookup value. I type a comma, and then for the table array, that will be the entire table. I select the top row, including the helper column, Shift Control down, arrow F4 to lock it and jump back, and then comma. For the third argument, the column index number. For the date, I need a return value from column 2. For the region, I need 3. For the manager, I need 4. Then as I copy right and left, I need to increment 2, 3, 4, 5. Then in this case, I'll be using a function that increments when I copy right and left. It's the columns function. So if I type columns and then I hit tab, I select any two adjacent cells. Let it be K and L, any two cells next to each other. I close the bracket and I lock the first reference. That will be an expandable range that will increment as I copy to the right from K1 to L1. That means 2. L1 will increment and will get 3, 4, 5. And then I hit comma at the end and I type 0 for exact match. When I closed the bracket and hit enter, then I was able to extract the date corresponding to the first record where the two conditions are met. I can copy my function to the right. When I copy my function to the right, I want to copy without formatting because I lost the formatting for the sales and the cost. I click on the down arrow for the options tag and select fill without formatting to bring back the formatting. Now I want to copy down, then I hover over the lower right corner and I copy down for a certain number of records, and I also want to copy without formatting. When I exceed the number of records where the two conditions are met, I get a not available error. To turn it off, I wrap my entire function in an if error function. Then I put my function in the edit mode and I wrap the VLOOKUP function in an if error function. If we get an error with this bunch of functions, click at the end. What do you want? In this case, I want nothing, double quote, and I close the bracket. To populate the function, I hit Control Enter. And this is how I solved the problem. If I change the name and I select a different name, let it be George. These are the transactions for George in the East region. I can change the region and select West, and these are the transactions for George in the West region. With the VLOOKUP function, I had to create a helper column, and at the same time, I used 5 supporting functions. I'm going to hide these columns because I want to show you the other solution using a dynamic array function. Right-click and hide. And now I'll be creating a filter dynamic array function. The filter dynamic array function doesn't need the helper column. The filter dynamic array function will be created once and it will spill to the adjacent cells. The filter dynamic array function will not require locking or unlocking. I type equal filter and then I hit tab. What's your array? My array will be from the date to the sales. Shift control down arrow and then control backspace because I don't want to lock. And then I type a comma. What would you like to include? I want to include the records where the region equals this region and the records where the manager equals this manager. In a function, when you have multiple conditions and you multiply these conditions, that's the equivalent of an AND. So I'm opening bracket and I select the entire region column, shift control down arrow control backspace if it is equal to the region. I close the bracket, I didn't lock anything, and I multiplied, that's the equivalent of AND. I open bracket for my second condition. I select the entire manager column, shift control down arrow control backspace if it is equal to the selected name from the drop list, and I close the bracket for the second condition, and I close the bracket for the filter function. One single function, no helper column, no support functions. I hit enter and I get the result which spills to the adjacent cells. Then in this case, I can definitely tell that the filter function is way superior. In some work situations, the lookup value is not the entire value we see in the lookup column. In this example, I have a list which shows a buyer, a city, a state, a phone, a cost, quantity, and total. I have part of the name in this list, not the full name, and I want to be able to extract the phone number, which is in column 4, just by looking at part of the name. This partial lookup is possible by combining wildcards to the lookup value. Let's see how we do that. In cell K2, I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I'm looking at this name, but because I don't have the full name, I'm going to use the joining operator of Excel, and in double quotation, I type a star. The asterisk or the star is a replacement of any number of characters from 0 to infinity. I then type a comma. My table array will be the entire table. It was a table and I named it partial. I type a comma. I want a return value from column number 4. Then I type 4 and then comma 0 for exact match, and I close the bracket. The VLOOKUP function is using a lookup value and I'm joining it to a wildcard to compensate for the absence of the remaining characters. When I hit enter, I get the phone number. I can test with a different name and it's extracting the phone number. In this example, I have the same list. I have the full name, but I have multiple occurrences of the same name. When you look at this name, Landon, I have it here, I have it there, and I have it here. In a previous example, I showed you what we could do to extract all the amounts, all the totals corresponding to a selected name. We needed a helper column, and we needed a support function. This time, I would like to extract the total amount in one single cell, and I want them to be separated by commas. Can I use a VLOOKUP function to do that? No, I can't. So if I type equal VLOOKUP and then I hit tab, my lookup value is this one, comma. My table array will be this entire table, and I named it comma. I type a comma, and because I want to extract the total, which is column index number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then I type 7, comma 0, and I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I extracted just the first one, not all of them. How can I extract all of them? That in this case, it's easier for me to use another classic function, which is the if function. So let's do that. If I delete and I type equal if, and then I hit tab. What's your logical test? My logical test is to compare the buyer name in this entire column and ask, is it equal to the buyer name I'm selecting in cell I2? And then I type a comma. What if the logical test returns a true? In this case, I want a return value from this entire column. Otherwise, I don't want anything, so I type double quote, double quote. I close the bracket. If you want to see what this function will be doing, if I select it and then I hit F9, you will see that it's extracting all the amounts. But in a classic version of Excel, it will be returning only the first amount. This is Microsoft 365, so if I hit Ctrl Z and then I hit Enter, then it's extracting all the amounts. What if I'm in a version of Excel 2019 or later, 2021? Then I'm going to display all these amounts in one cell separated by commas. How do I do that? I select the function, I put it in the edit mode F2, and I wrap it in a TEXTJOIN function. So if I type TEXTJOIN and then I hit tab, what's the delimiter? I want to separate them by comma. Then I type double quote, comma, double quote. I then type a comma to move to the next argument, ignore empty. I want to ignore empty cells because as you can see, we have empty cells. Then I type another comma to skip this argument and accept the default to ignore empty cells. And the if function is the last argument. I close the bracket at the end, and when I hit enter, I would get all the amounts for the corresponding buyer separated by commas in one single cell. If you have a list of managers and having multiple sales transactions, and you would like to extract, let's say, the top records, by default, the VLOOKUP function extracts the first occurrence where the condition is met. What if I want to extract the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one? I created a drop list here in cell I1 where I have an incremental number. I want to extract the third occurrence of a record where the name of the manager is Daniel. I do have some conditional formatting in my list, and all the records for Daniel are highlighted. I want to extract the third one. And to do that, I'll be creating a helper column in column B. Let's unhide column B, right-click and unhide, and I'll be creating a helper column. I type an equal sign, I select cell C2, and then I want to join it to build an incremental number with every occurrence of the name Mary. Then I use a COUNTIF function, COUNTIF, and then I hit tab. I want to count from C2 to C2. If it is equal to C2, I select cell D2 and I use my left arrow to select C2, shift colon. I want to lock the first occurrence only. I put my blinking cursor in the first occurrence and I lock it. I type a comma and I want C2 as a condition, as a criterion. I type C2 and I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I get Mary 1. If I double click and send it down, with the second occurrence of Mary, I get Mary 2. Look at the condition Daniel, Daniel 1, Daniel 2, Daniel 3. Now I would like to extract, according to the drop list, the third occurrence for Daniel. To do that, I'll be creating a VLOOKUP function in cell I2, equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? I select Daniel and I want to join it to the number coming from the drop list. Then I type Shift 7 on my keyboard and I click on cell I1. That's my lookup value. I type a comma and then where is your table array? My table array will be from B to F. Shift Control down arrow, Control backspace, and then I type a comma. I need a return value from column 5, then I type 5, comma 0. For exact match, I close the bracket, and then I hit enter. Now I'm getting the third transaction for Daniel. If I want to get the fifth one, then I can click on the down arrow, and then I can select 5, and everything is dynamic. I'm extracting the end value with a VLOOKUP function. Most of the time, our table array is vertical, but in this example, my table array is horizontal. I have in row number 1 a country, then in row number 2 I have a capital, in row number 3 I have the population, and in row number 4 I have the area. I would like to extract an entire record, but I want to extract it in a row. I created a drop list in cell B9, and from this drop list I can select any country. When I select a country, I want to extract all the information for this country. Then I'll be creating an HLOOKUP function. This is a horizontal lookup function. Equal HLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. My lookup value is the country coming from the drop list. And because I intend to copy to the right, then I need to lock it by hitting F4. I type a comma, and my table array will be the entire table. Shift Control right arrow, and then F4 to lock it and jump back. And then I type a comma. Now it asks me, instead of column index number with the VLOOKUP, it asks for a row index number. The row index number for the capital will be row 2, and then for the population 3, 4. And because I'm dragging to the right, then I need to create a function that increments when I copy right and left. That's the perfect job of the columns function. So I type columns, and then I hit tab. Select any two cells. It doesn't matter, any two cells, so long as they are next to each other. Close the bracket and lock the first reference, F4, and now this will create an expandable range that will return an incremental number from column A to column B. That's 2 columns, then it will become 3, 4. That's exactly what I want. I type comma 0 for exact match, and I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I would have extracted the capital. I can drag it to the right, and I would have extracted an entire record using the HLOOKUP function. We previously talked about the VLOOKUP with an approximate match. Formatting can be very tricky with a VLOOKUP with an approximate match. I have a score table that shows the score, the corresponding grade, and the credit. And I would like to know what will be the grade for a student who is getting 77. When I look at the table, that should be a B+. And then when I type a VLOOKUP function in cell G3 equal VLOOKUP, my lookup value will be F3. I type a comma. My table array will be the entire score table, and then I type a comma. The column index number will be 2, and then when I type a comma for the range lookup, this is an approximate match. Then I hit tab to select true. When I close the bracket and then I hit enter, it says B. But from the table, I think it should be B+. The reason for this, when I select the cell having the score, I look at the formula bar, it's not 77, it's 76.9. If I increase the decimals, now I can see that I was tricked by formatting. If I change the 76.9 and I make it 77, now I'm getting the B+ as I expected. In this example, I want to combine 3 VLOOKUP functions. I have an income statement for 6 years, and in the upper part, I can see an income tax table. The income tax table shows me how much tax I should be paying based upon the income. from 0 to 50,000, from 50 to 75, and so on. The tax amount comes in two parts. A fixed amount coming from the previous bracket, and for the difference between the current income and the limit of the bracket, we pay a certain percentage. That I would like to calculate, let's say for 2019, I want to break it down into 3 VLOOKUP functions, then I'll be combining all of them together. For this amount in D17, how much I should be paying from the previous bracket? Then I'll be typing equal VLOOKUP and then I hit tab. My lookup value will be the income. I type a comma and then I select the table array where I added a helper column that adds 1 for each bracket. I select the entire table array and I want to lock it by hitting F4. I type a comma. I want to extract the amount from the previous bracket in column 4, then I type 4, comma 1 for approximate match, and then I close the bracket. When I hit enter, that should be the amount from the previous bracket depending upon my income. That should be the amount paid up to 100,000. Now I want to calculate the difference above the 100,000. And to do that, I'll be typing an equal sign. I select the amount and I want to subtract the lower limit of this bracket for which I already paid 21,250. So I type minus VLOOKUP. I hit the tab key. My lookup value will be the same amount. I type a comma. My table array will be the entire table. I lock it F4. I need the return value from the second column. Then I type comma 2, comma 1 for approximate match. And then I hit enter. And that should be the amount for which I should be paying a percentage. To calculate the tax on the remaining amount, I type an equal sign. I select the cell above and I want to multiply it by another VLOOKUP function that extracts the rate for the remaining amount. VLOOKUP and then I hit tab. Same lookup value. I type a comma, same table array, and I lock it F4, and then I type a comma. I need a return value from column 5, and it's an approximate match, comma 1, and I close the bracket. That will be the tax on the remaining amount, and then in cell D24, I can see the total tax I should be paying. I want to combine the 3 functions. To combine the 3 functions, I'm going to copy them to the Office clipboard without the equal sign. I open the Office clipboard. If I have anything, I clear it, and I select the first VLOOKUP function. I copy it to the Office clipboard, Control C, and then I hit Escape. I select the second one. I copy it, Control C, and I hit Escape. And then I select the last one, the VLOOKUP portion only, Control C, and then I hit Escape. Let's combine the 3 functions in one cell, equal sign, and the first VLOOKUP function. And then I want to add. What do you want to add? I want to add the result of multiplying the tax rate on the remaining amount with the difference. Then I add a plus sign, and then I open bracket. I select the second calculation, which is the difference. I close the bracket for this part, and I multiply it by the last VLOOKUP function. And then I hit enter and I get the same amount. I can copy my function to the right and to the left by dragging from the autofill handle, and I was able to calculate the total tax by combining 3 VLOOKUP functions. You might have your data scattered among multiple lists. Like in this example, I have a sales transaction table that shows a date, a product, units, and code. To recognize what this code corresponds to, I have another table which shows the code, the province, and the region. And then each product corresponds to a category and it has a retail price. I can see that in the last table, the category table, where I see the product, the retail price, and the category. If I would like to calculate the revenue for each region, for each category, or for each product, then in this case, I would have to create multiple VLOOKUP functions. And because this table includes almost 70,000 rows, then I'll be creating over 300,000 VLOOKUP functions. Instead of that, why not send the 3 tables to Power Pivot, the data model, and in the data model, I simply create relationships between them. These relationships will be the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of VLOOKUP functions. I already added the 3 tables to the data model. I do not cover this part in details because in this course I'm focusing on the VLOOKUP function. I have the Power Pivot tab, and if I click on Manage, I can see the 3 tables already there, Products T, Province T, and Category T. If I switch to the View, Diagram View, I can create relationships between the different tables. I drag the code from the Province T to the Products T. I can also create a relationship between the 3rd table by dragging the product to Product. And now these relationships will be the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of VLOOKUP functions. Should you wish to analyze your data, you can click on Pivot Table, and it takes you back to Excel, where you can create your pivot table. You can calculate the revenue with a SUMX function. We covered that in a Power Pivot course, so I'm going to hit Cancel. Just remember, sometimes the data model is a better option than creating hundreds of thousands of VLOOKUP functions. I showed you in this course over 30 different real-work examples to become an expert with the VLOOKUP function. In some examples, I pointed to the alternate, more powerful dynamic array functions available in Microsoft 365. So if you enjoyed this course, give it a thumbs up, share it with others, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to be notified as soon as I post my next course. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.